They told us body cameras were meant to capture the truth, but the truth I recorded in the California redwoods back in '97 was too dangerous to see the light of day. I'm the ranger who found a juvenile Bigfoot trapped by poachers, and the footage captured by the camera on my chest proved that sometimes you have to break the law just to do the right thing. The government classified the tape and buried the evidence to protect the secret, but they couldn't erase my memory of what I saw. Before we unlock the files, let me know down in the comments where you're watching from today, and if you want to hear more true stories that the authorities tried to cover up, hit that subscribe button. My name is James Rivera, 44 years old, with the knees of a retired Marine and the badge of a California State Park Ranger. I didn't patrol these woods for the fresh air. I did it because order requires presence. Nature is chaotic, but the law is the grid we place over it to make sense of the wild. I ran my sector with the same discipline I learned in the Corps. Boots polished, uniform pressed, report logs filled out in blue ink, precise to the minute. I wasn't the ranger who let you off with a warning for an illegal campfire. I was the guy who wrote the citation because a rule ignored is a standard lowered. Integrity isn't a toggle switch you flip when it's convenient. It's the structural steel that holds your character up when the world tries to bend you. Most people think a ranger is a tour guide with a gun, but they don't see the poachers or the meth labs hidden in the brush. My beat was 50 square miles of rugged terrain where the radio signal died, and you were your own backup. I knew every ravine and ridgeline in Sector 4 like the back of my hand. It was a jurisdiction of shadows, a place where civilization felt like a rumor, and the trees were older than the country I served. The department had just handed down a mandate that changed the texture of the job. Accountability, the brass called it. Liability coverage, the union whispered. They issued us the first generation of body-worn cameras. In '97, these weren't the sleek clips you see today. It was a brick of a device, a heavy plastic box strapped to my chest, wired to a battery pack on my belt that weighed as much as a canteen. I hated the thing at first. It felt like a leash, a mechanical eye judging every move I made. But I was a good soldier, so I wore it. I made sure the lens was clean and the tape was fresh. The camera doesn't lie, the sergeant had told us during the briefing. I took comfort in that. If you follow the rules, the truth is your shield. I didn't know yet that the truth could also be a trap. The camera added a layer of performance to the patrol. You were always on. I found myself narrating my actions for the benefit of a future review board. Officer Rivera entering North Quadrant, 0800 hours. It created a permanent record of the mundane. I was archiving silence, wind, and the crunch of boots on pine needles. I was building a library of nothing, waiting for the moment when the red recording light would actually matter. The technology was supposed to protect us from false accusations, to provide an objective reality in court. It was the ultimate tool for a by-the-book officer. It ensured that procedure was followed, that evidence was chain of custody secure, and that the law was applied without bias. I believed in the system. I believed that if you captured a crime on tape, justice was a mathematical certainty. That morning in November was cold, the kind of damp chill that settles in your bones. The park was officially closed for the season, the gates locked, the tourists gone. It should have been a quiet shift, a simple perimeter check to ensure the winterization was holding. But the woods felt tense. The birds were quiet. The air had a metallic taste to it, like ozone before a lightning strike. I checked the battery level on the body cam. Green. Tape remaining. 60 minutes. I adjusted the strap, feeling the weight of the device against my sternum. It was a reassuring pressure, a reminder that I wasn't alone out here. The state was watching. History was watching. I stepped out of the patrol truck and locked the door, the sound echoing too loudly in the stillness. I was 2 miles deep into the old growth when the silence broke. It wasn't the wind. It was a sound that didn't belong in a protected sanctuary. It was the sharp, flat crack of a high-caliber rifle, followed by a wet thud. It wasn't a warning shot. It was a kill shot. I reached for my radio, but then I reached for the button on my chest. Click. Recording started. I moved toward the gunshot with the muscle memory of Da Nang, keeping low and slow. The body camera hummed against my chest, a quiet witness to my tactical approach. Suspected 1031 in progress, I whispered for the record, my voice barely audible over the wind. North Ridge, Sector 4. I didn't key the radio. If they were monitoring police frequencies, a squelch break would give me away. I moved through the ferns, checking my sightlines, treating the forest like a hostile zone. The smell hit me before I saw them, not the clean scent of pine, but the metallic tang of fresh blood and the heavy, musky odor of something wild and frightened. I crested the ridge and looked down into a box canyon that was supposed to be empty wilderness. Instead, it looked like a forward operating base. There were 2 modified ATVs hidden under camouflage netting, vehicles that had no business being 10 miles past the fire road. This wasn't a couple of locals spotlighting deer for freezer meat. This was a professional extraction team. They had set up a winch system on a sturdy oak and were dragging something massive out of the brush. My hand went to my holster, thumb breaking the retention strap. The camera lens captured the scene in grainy detail. 3 men, dressed in high-end tactical gear, were working with efficient, practiced movements. They weren't high-fiving or drinking beer, they were working a job. One was securing a perimeter, scanning the woods with thermal binoculars. The other 2 were focused on the catch. I zoomed my own eyes in, trying to make sense of the shapes on the ground. There were 2 large mounds covered in heavy canvas tarps, motionless and soaking the earth with dark fluid. The scale was wrong for bear. They were too long, too broad at the shoulders. Then I saw the cage. It was a custom-welded steel box, reinforced with rebar, sitting on the back of a flatbed trailer towed by the ATV. Inside, something was thrashing against the bars. It wasn't growling like a cougar or barking like a dog. It was screaming, a high-pitched vocalizing wail that sounded terrifyingly human. The sound cut through my professional detachment like a knife. I crouched behind a fallen redwood, the camera recording the audio of a nightmare. I watched the man with the thermal lowers his binoculars and walk over to the cage. He kicked the bars, shouting, "Shut it up! You want the juice again?" The creature inside recoiled, huddled into a ball of dark fur. It was small, maybe 4 feet tall, clutching its knees to its chest. It looked like a child in a costume, but the way it moved, the fluid dexterity of its hands covering its face, was biological reality. It was a juvenile. And looking at the tarps on the ground, the sickening math added up instantly. They had liquidated the parents to secure the asset. I crept closer, needing the camera to see what my brain refused to accept. The wind shifted, blowing the corner of the nearest tarp up. The lens caught it. A foot. A massive hair-covered foot with 5 distinct toes and a mid-tarsal break, easily 18 inches long. It was the smoking gun of cryptozoology, lying dead in the mud. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't poaching. This was assassination. They had wiped out a family unit to kidnap the survivor. The conversation drifted up to my position, captured clearly by the microphone. "Byers' jet is in waiting in Redding," one of them said, wiping a bloody knife on his pant leg. "We need to move. This little freak is worth $2 million easy." "What about the big ones?" the other asked. "Leave them. Let the coyotes handle the evidence. We're only paid for the live specimen." They were traffickers. They were selling a sentient being to a private collector like it was a rare painting. The juvenile in the cage looked up, and for a split second, its eyes met my position. It couldn't see me, but it was pleading with the universe. The face was a mask of grief, lips pulled back, eyes wide and wet with tears. It understood loss. It knew its mother and father were the lumps under the canvas. I was recording a tragedy that no human court had a statute for. I was a ranger sworn to protect the wildlife, but this wasn't wildlife. This was a person. I gripped my service weapon, my knuckles white. Procedure was clear. Call for backup, observe and report. Wait for the tactical team. But backup was an hour away. By the time the sheriff's deputies navigated the logging roads, these men would be gone, and that child would be on a plane to a cage in Europe or Asia, never to see a tree again. The law was too slow for this. The law was designed for deer seasons and fishing licenses, not for the abduction of a species we didn't officially recognize. I looked at the radio on my shoulder. All I had to do was press the button. Dispatch, shots fired. That was the protocol. That was the job. But then I looked at the cage again, at the small hand gripping the cold steel bars. If I called it in, the poachers would be arrested, yes. But the juvenile, it would become evidence. It would be seized by the state, dissected by science, or locked in a government lab for the rest of its life. I realized with a terrifying clarity that saving the animal from the poachers meant condemning it to the system. The radio in my hand felt like a live grenade. My thumb hovered over the transmit button, the plastic textured and cold against my skin. Dispatch was just a word, but it represented the entire apparatus of the state, the flashing lights, the helicopters, the news crews. If I pressed that button, I was initiating a chain of events that could not be stopped. The poachers would go to jail, sure, but the juvenile, it would go to a facility. It would be named, tagged, and studied until the day it died. I wasn't saving it. I was just changing its jailer. I looked at the cage again. The creature was shivering, clutching the bars with hands that were terrifyingly human. It wasn't an animal in the way a deer is an animal. It had a face that registered complex terror. If I followed the book, California Penal Code, state park regulations, I was required to seize all contraband. That living, breathing child was contraband. I would have to sign it into evidence. I would have to hand it over to men in white coats who would view it as a biological puzzle, not a grieving orphan. The body camera hummed, a red LED blinking in my peripheral vision. It was recording my hesitation. It was documenting the exact moment Officer Rivera stopped being a ranger and started being a human being. I realized that the law is a binary system, legal or illegal, but justice is a spectrum. Sometimes the law is the mechanism of injustice. If I processed this evidence, I was complicit in the destruction of a species. I would be the man who handed the Sasquatch over to the government to be dissected. I lowered the radio. I didn't holster it. I clipped it back to my shoulder, leaving the channel open but silent. I looked down at the camera lens, speaking in a whisper that I knew the microphone would catch. "I can't do it," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I can't let them take him. If I call this in, he's gone. He's a specimen. He deserves to be free." I was confessing to a future jury. I was articulating the motive for the career suicide I was about to commit. The choice wasn't made in a flash of heroism. It was made in a sickening pit of dread. I knew what I was risking. My pension, my badge, my freedom. If I went down there and went rogue, I was technically obstructing justice, tampering with evidence, and potentially committing assault. But looking at the bodies of the parents under the tarps, I knew the only law that mattered in this canyon was the law of the wild. You protect the young. The statutes of California didn't apply here. I unholstered my .40 caliber Smith & Wesson. The weight of the gun felt different now. It wasn't a tool of the state anymore. It was a tool of my own conscience. I checked the chamber, one in the pipe. I wasn't going to arrest these men for poaching. I was going to engage them as hostiles in a rescue operation. I had to disable their ability to pursue, secure the hostage, and vanish before the official cavalry, if I ever called them, could arrive. I was about to conduct a military extraction in my own jurisdiction. The tactical assessment ran through my mind. 3 targets, 2 near the truck, 1 by the cage. They were armed with hunting rifles, bolt action, likely high caliber. I had a semi-automatic pistol and the element of surprise. I needed to be fast, violent, and loud. I needed to panic them. If they had time to think, they would realize they outgunned me. I had to make them believe they were surrounded. I had to become the nightmare they feared in the woods. I took a deep breath, smelling the pine and the blood. I was breaking every protocol I had sworn to uphold. "I, James Rivera, do solemnly swear." The oath echoed in my head, mocking me. But I realized the oath was to the people, to the land, to the spirit of the law. Saving this creature was protecting the park. It was the ultimate act of conservation. I was preserving a mystery that the world was trying to crush. I wasn't betraying the badge. I was cleaning the tarnish off it. I reached up and tapped the body camera again, ensuring the light was steady. "Date is November 14th, I whispered. "I am entering the site. I am going to neutralize the threat and release the subject. I am acting on my own authority." It was a declaration of independence. I was logging my intent so that if they found my body, they would know I didn't die confused. I died making a choice. I stepped out from behind the redwood, leaving the safety of the shadows. I didn't shout police or freeze. I didn't offer them the chance to surrender and turn this into a negotiation. I raised my weapon, lined up the sights on the engine block of their truck, their only way out with the trailer, and squeezed the trigger. The gunshot shattered the silence of the canyon, not as a call for order, but as the opening bell of a war. The shot into the engine block did exactly what it was supposed to do. It created chaos. Steam hissed violently from the radiator, enveloping the truck in a white fog. The 3 men scrambled, diving for the cover of the tree line, shouting in confusion. They thought they were being engaged by a squad, not a lone ranger with a handgun. I didn't stop moving. I advanced on the trailer, firing 2 more rounds into the dirt near their position to keep their heads down. "Police! Down on the ground!" I roared, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. I wasn't arresting them, I was suppressing them. I reached the trailer, my chest heaving, the camera recording the frantic movements of my hands. The juvenile in the cage was shrieking now, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. He was slamming himself against the back of the steel box, trying to get as far away from the noise as possible. I holstered my weapon, a tactical error that would have failed me in the academy, but I needed both hands. I grabbed the heavy padlock securing the cage door. It was hardened steel. I couldn't shoot it off without risking a ricochet into the kid. I spotted a pair of heavy bolt cutters in the bed of the pickup, lying next to a coil of rope. I grabbed them, the metal cold and heavy. The camera angle shifted wildly as I wrestled with the tool, the lens capturing the rusted iron of the cage bars and the dark, wet eyes of the creature inside. "I've got you," I said, my voice dropping from a shout to a breathless whisper. "Hold on, son. I've got you." I wasn't speaking to an animal. I was speaking to a victim. I fit the jaws of the cutter around the hasp and threw my weight into it. The metal snapped with a loud crack. I threw the lock into the mud and yanked the door open. The squeal of the hinges was deafening in the sudden silence. The juvenile didn't run. He curled tighter, covering his head with his arms, expecting a blow. I reached in. The body cam footage of this moment is the most damning evidence against me and the most redeeming. My hand, pale and shaking, reached out to touch the dark matted fur of his shoulder. I wasn't dragging a suspect out. I was comforting a child. "Come on," I urged, tugging gently. "You have to move now." He looked up and the lens caught it perfectly. The intelligence, the recognition. He saw the uniform, but he also saw the open door. He uncurled, his movements fluid and desperate. As he moved, I saw the blood on his leg. The wire snare had cut deep into his ankle. He stumbled as he tried to put weight on it, letting out a sharp whimper. Protocol said to secure the scene. Humanity said to help. I didn't hesitate. I moved inside the radius of the open door and ducked my shoulder under his arm. He was heavy, dense with muscle, smelling of pine pitch and fear. For a moment, a wild Sasquatch was leaning on a California State Park ranger for support. The camera captured the side of his face, the flared nostrils, the heavy brow. I half-carried, half-dragged him off the trailer, his good foot finding purchase in the mud. We were a team, united by the urgency of escape. We hit the ground, and I pointed toward the dense ravines to the east, away from the logging road. "Go," I said, pointing firmly. "Run." He hesitated, looking back at the tarps where his parents lay. It was a moment of heartbreaking indecision. He wanted to stay with them. I stepped between him and the bodies, using my own body as a visual block. "They're gone," I said, my voice breaking. "You have to live. Go." I shoved him gently toward the trees. He looked at me one last time, a look that lasted a second but felt like an hour, and then he vanished. He didn't run like a man. He flowed. He hit the brush and disappeared instantly, the foliage swallowing him whole. 1 second he was there, the next the forest was empty. I stood there panting, my heart hammering against the plastic case of the camera. I was alone at the crime scene, surrounded by evidence, dead bodies, and fleeing felons. I checked the camera. The red light was still blinking. It had seen everything. It had seen me ignore the suspects to free the contraband. It had seen me aid in the escape of a biological anomaly. If I turned this footage in, the world would know Bigfoot existed, but they would also know I had let one go. They would see the compassion, but the prosecutor would see dereliction of duty. I had saved the life, but I had compromised the case. I looked at the broken lock lying in the mud. I looked at the empty cage. The narrative was already forming in my head, a story that would fit the paperwork, but hide the truth. I couldn't let the investigators know I had opened that door. If they knew I opened it, they would ask why. And there was no answer to why that didn't end with me in handcuffs or a mental institution. I had to make it look like an accident. I had to make it look like a breakout. The silence that followed the escape was heavy, filled only by the hum of the winch engine and my own ragged breathing. I looked down at the body camera, the red light pulsing like a heartbeat. It had recorded the act of mercy, which the law would classify as a felony. I couldn't delete the footage. The unit was tamper-proof, designed to prevent exactly what I was thinking. But I could control the narrative of the crime scene. I had to make the physical evidence contradict the digital record, creating enough confusion to protect the fugitive. I had to become the very thing I despised, a dirty cop. I picked up the heavy bolt cutters, my fingerprints sliding on the cold steel. If forensics found the cut link on the padlock, they would know a human hand had opened the cage. I grabbed the broken lock from the mud and hurled it as far as I could into the dense underbrush of the ravine. It wasn't a perfect disposal, but in this terrain, a 3-inch piece of metal is a needle in a haystack. Then, I took the cutters and jammed them into the cage mesh, twisting the steel bars outward. I needed it to look like a breakout, like the creature had used supernatural strength to tear its way to freedom. The mud around the trailer was a disaster of evidence. There were tire tracks, boot prints, and the massive, distinct impressions of the juvenile's feet. I began to pace frantically, stomping my boots over the pristine prints, turning the clear indentations into a chaotic slurry of mud. I was destroying the biological profile. If they could cast a print, they could prove it wasn't a bear. I was literally dancing on the grave of my integrity, scuffing out the truth with every step, panting into the microphone as I worked. I stopped and grabbed the lapel of my uniform, pulling the camera lens up to my face. I needed to speak to the future. I needed the internal affairs investigator who would review this tape to understand that this wasn't corruption. It was necessity. "I know what this looks like," I whispered. my voice trembling with adrenaline. I know I'm compromising the scene, but if I process this by the book, he dies in a lab. I am choosing the greater good over the penal code. I am sorry. God help me, I am sorry. I felt the badge pinned to my chest, the metal cold through the fabric. It felt heavy, like a lead weight. I had spent 20 years polishing that shield, believing that it represented order in a chaotic world. Now, I was using the authority it gave me to obstruct justice. I was apologizing to the symbol of my service. I swore to protect, I told the camera, tears stinging my eyes. That doesn't just mean protecting people. It means protecting the innocent. And that thing, he was innocent. I moved back to the truck, wiping the bolt cutters down with a rag from the bed, scrubbing away my prints before tossing them back into the toolbox. I was staging a play. The script had to be perfect. The narrative. I arrived, shots fired, suspects fled, and during the chaos, the animal in the cage, species unknown, panicked and broke loose. It was a lie built on a foundation of half-truths, but it was the only shield I had left. I was constructing my defense in real time, relying on the confusion of the event to cover the precision of my sabotage. I looked at the tarps covering the parents. There was nothing I could do for them. They were the hard evidence I couldn't hide, but I could remove the context. I searched the cab of the truck, looking for paperwork, maps, or shipping manifests that would link this operation to a specific buyer or a laboratory. I found a clipboard with coordinates and a satellite phone. I took the phone and smashed it against a rock, then threw the pieces into the deep brush. I wasn't just hiding the Bigfoot, I was hiding the conspiracy that wanted them. The internal conflict was a physical pain, a tightening in my chest that felt like a heart attack. I was a Marine. I was a ranger. I followed orders. But looking at the empty cage, I realized that blind obedience is the refuge of the coward. Sometimes you have to break the rules to save the game. I was sacrificing my professional soul to save a life. It was a trade I would make again, but it didn't make the taste of betrayal any less bitter in my mouth. I was alone in the woods, a criminal with a badge. I checked the camera angle again. I needed to make sure it saw the broken bars, the trampled mud. I was directing my own movie. "Subject has escaped," I said firmly, using my command voice trying to stabilize the recording. "The cage appears to have been breached from the inside. Suspects are still at large. I am moving to pursue and apprehend." I was lying to the record, creating the audio log that would match my falsified report. I was cementing the fiction. The sound of snapping twigs to the north snapped me back to the immediate tactical reality. The poachers. They hadn't run far. They were regrouping, likely realizing they were facing one man, not a SWAT team. I had tampered with the scene, but the job wasn't done. I still had 3 armed felons in the woods, men who had just seen their multi-million-dollar asset vanish. They were desperate and they were armed. I took a deep breath, pushed the guilt down into the dark pit of my stomach, and raised my weapon. The crime scene was set. Now I had to make the arrest. I transitioned instantly from conspirator back to cop. I moved laterally through the brush, flanking the position where I had heard the voices. I needed to end this quickly. I couldn't afford a shootout that would bring a forensics team into the woods to comb every inch of the soil I had just disturbed. I used the force multiplier tactics I learned in the Corps, shouting commands from different positions to simulate a squad. "Unit 2, flank left. Unit 3, hold the ridge." It was theater, but panic makes men stupid, and these men were already reeling from the loss of their payday. I caught them huddled near a rocky outcrop, arguing over a map. They were trying to find an extraction route on foot. I stepped out with my weapon leveled, the camera capturing the surrender. "State Park Rangers, drop the weapons or you will be engaged." I didn't give them time to process. The sight of the uniform and the absolute certainty in my voice broke their nerve. They dropped the rifles. They were mercenaries, not martyrs. Without the creature, there was no profit in dying. I moved in, kicking the rifles away, barking orders. "Face down, hands behind your heads." I cuffed them one by one, the ratcheting sound of the steel acting as a punctuation mark to the chaos. As I searched the lead poacher, the one with the thermal binoculars, he looked up at me, confused. "Where is it?" he hissed. "Where did the asset go?" I looked straight into his eyes and then at the camera lens and lied with the conviction of a saint. "I don't know what you're talking about. You're under arrest for illegal poaching of black bear and felony weapons possession." He laughed, a harsh, incredulous bark. "Bear? You saw it. You opened the cage." I tightened the cuffs until he winced. "I saw an empty cage and 3 men with illegal firearms," I said loudly, for the benefit of the microphone. "If you want to tell the judge you were hunting monsters, be my guest. See how that plays with a psych evaluation." I was gambling on their greed. If they admitted what they were really hunting, they admitted to a crime so bizarre they'd be laughed out of court, or worse, investigated by feds who would bury them to keep the secret. I marched them back to their truck, forcing them to sit on the ground with their backs to the tarps. I couldn't hide the parents' bodies, but I could control the context. I didn't lift the canvas. I treated the lumps as evidence to be processed by forensics, knowing that by the time a recovery team got out here, likely tomorrow, the local scavengers or the rest of the Sasquatch clan might have removed the remains. Or if they were found, they would be misidentified or lost in transit. I was buying time with bureaucracy. I radioed dispatch, finally breaking radio silence. Dispatch, 4 Lincoln 10, suspects in custody, 3 males, requesting transport at the trailhead. I gave a vague location, 2 miles south of the actual site, forcing me to march them out. This was deliberate. I needed to get them away from the physical evidence. I needed the crime scene to be the arrest, not the kill site. Every step away from that canyon was a layer of insulation over the truth. The poachers realized the game I was playing. They shut up. They realized that I was erasing their operation to save myself. And in doing so, I was erasing their biggest crime. If I charged them with bear poaching, they do a few years and pay a fine. If they pushed the Bigfoot angle, they opened a door that neither of us wanted opened. We entered a silent, unholy alliance. I wouldn't mention the monster if they didn't. The body camera recorded the silence, the heavy breathing, and the unspoken agreement between the lawmen and the criminals. I secured them to a sturdy madrone tree near the fire road, stripping them of their packs and comms gear. "Transport is 40 minutes out," I told them. "Don't go anywhere." I had neutralized the threat. They couldn't hunt. They couldn't call for backup. The woods were safe again, at least from them, but the camera was still rolling, and I had one more loose end to tie up. The report I would write later would be a masterpiece of omission, but the video file on my chest was a liability I would have to deal with later. I walked back toward the edge of the clearing, ostensibly to secure the perimeter, but in reality, to look east. The juvenile was out there somewhere, injured, alone, and terrified. I had arrested the bad guys, but I hadn't finished the job. The rescue wasn't complete until I knew he wasn't bleeding out in a ditch. The sun was starting to dip, casting long, bruised shadows through the redwoods. The golden hour for photography was also the golden hour for tracking. I turned my back on the prisoners. "I'm doing a final sweep for accomplices," I said to the air, justifying my movement for the log. I stepped back into the dense timber, moving not toward the road, but back toward the ravine. I needed to see it. I needed to know that the risk I had taken, the career I had just torched, was worth it. I followed the trail of broken ferns, the camera lens scanning the deep gloom, looking for a sign of life in the land of the dead. I left the prisoners secured to the tree and moved back into the twilight. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold dread about the juvenile's injury. I followed the trail. Not difficult, unfortunately. The snare had done damage. Dark droplets of blood marked the ferns every few feet, a breadcrumb trail of pain leading into the deep ravine. I moved slowly, announcing my presence with deliberate noise, snapping twigs and coughing. I didn't want to startle a wounded animal, or worse, startle whatever might be looking for him. The camera lens stared ahead, a cyclopean eye capturing the red trail leading into the blank spots of the map. I found him a quarter-mile down, huddled under the root ball of a fallen cedar. He was shivering violently, clutching his injured leg, his eyes squeezed shut. When he heard me, he didn't run. He was done running. He looked at me with eyes that held a terrifying amount of recognition. He knew I was the one who opened the door. I knelt 10 feet away, keeping my hands visible. "It's okay," I whispered, the microphone picking up the tremor in my voice. "I'm not going to hurt you." I was talking to a cryptid like a lost hiker, trying to bridge the gap between predator and protector. I reached into my med kit, pulling out a pressure bandage and a bottle of sterile water. I moved closer, inch by inch, watching his muscles tense. He let out a low growl, but it lacked conviction. He was exhausted. I took a chance that defied every survival instinct I had. I reached out and poured water onto the wound to wash away the mud. He flinched but didn't strike. I wrapped the white gauze around the laceration, the stark brightness of the bandage standing out against his dark fur. The camera recorded my hands working on his ankle. Proof of contact, proof of compassion, proof of treason against protocol. "We can't stay here," I told him, standing up and gesturing up the slope toward the deep wilderness boundary. He understood the intent, if not the words. He pushed himself up, leaning heavily on a branch he used as a crutch. I walked beside him, not as a captor, but as an escort. For 20 minutes we moved through the old growth, a ranger and a Sasquatch moving in tandem. The silence was profound. The forest seemed to be holding its breath, watching this impossible alliance navigate the ferns. I was guiding a ghost back to the spirit world. The hair on the back of my neck stood up abruptly. It wasn't the poachers. They were handcuffed miles away. This was something primal. The bird stopped singing. The juvenile stopped limping and stood straighter, lifting his head to sniff the air. He let out a sound, not a scream this time, but a low, resonant whoop that vibrated in my chest. It was a call. I scanned the trees, my hand resting near my holster out of habit. But I knew the gun was useless here. We had entered the territory of something much bigger than a bear. The answer came from the ridge above us, a wood knock that sounded like a baseball bat hitting a telephone pole. Crack, then another from the left. Crack. We were surrounded. The juvenile let out a chuff of excitement and started moving faster, ignoring his injury. I hurried to keep up, the camera capturing the blur of motion as we climbed. I wasn't guiding him anymore. He was leading me. We broke into a small clearing bathed in the last gray light of dusk, and I saw them. There were 3 of them standing at the edge of the timber. They were massive. Silhouettes cut from shadow and muscle, standing 7, maybe 8 feet tall. They didn't move. They just watched. The juvenile hobbled toward them, making soft, whimpering sounds. One of the adults, a female, stepped forward. She didn't run. She flowed. She scooped him up, checking him over, touching the white bandage on his leg. It was a scene of raw, unfiltered emotion. It was the reunion of a family that thought they had lost everything, captured in high-definition tape. I stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, fully aware that I was arguably the most vulnerable human on the planet at that moment. The large male, the silverback, looked over the female's shoulder. He stared directly at me. He stared directly into the lens. He didn't roar. He didn't charge. He raised one hand, palm open, and held it there for a heartbeat. It wasn't a threat. It was a ceasefire. It was an acknowledgement. You brought him back. The camera recorded the intelligence in that gaze, a look that dismantled millions of years of evolutionary separation. The female turned, carrying the juvenile effortlessly on her hip. The male lingered for a second longer, ensuring I wasn't following, and then they turned into the tree line. They moved with a silence that shouldn't be physically possible for creatures of that size. In seconds, they were gone. The forest swallowed them up as if they had never existed. I was left standing in the gloom, the only sound the whirring of the wind in the canopy and the beating of my own heart. I had just witnessed the impossible, and I had the tape to prove it. I looked down at the camera. The red light was still blinking. I had about 90 minutes of footage. I had the poaching, the rescue, the first aid, and the family reunion. I had proof of a sapient species in California. I had proof of my own crimes. I walked back toward the road, the adrenaline crashing into exhaustion. I touched the plastic case of the body cam. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a nuclear bomb, and when I got back to the station, I would have to hand it over to a system that I no longer trusted. The drive back to the station was a blur of high beams and exhaustion. I pulled into the precinct lot, the gravel crunching under my tires sounding like accusations. The suspects were in the cage in the back, silent and sullen. I marched them into booking, processing them on the charges we had silently agreed upon. Poaching black bear out of season and weapons violations. They didn't lawyer up. They didn't protest. They knew that a plea deal for poaching was infinitely better than explaining to a federal judge why they had a chimpanzee cage in the redwood forest. They took the fingerprinting with a grim resignation, and I felt the first layer of the lie settling over us like concrete. I walked into the equipment room to dock my body camera. This was the moment of no return. The upload station was a black tower of hard drives with blinking green lights. I unclipped the unit from my chest, my hand lingering on it for a second, and slotted it into the port. The screen flickered. Device detected. Uploading data. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, realizing I was digitizing my own felony. I was handing the state the evidence of my obstruction, my tampering, and the undeniable reality of the Sasquatch. I stood there until the bar hit 100%, feeling like I had just signed a confession. I didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, I was at my desk typing the initial arrest report when the sergeant's door opened. He didn't yell. He didn't wave me in. He just stood there, pale, looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Fear. "Rivera, in here, now." I walked in. The monitor on his desk was paused on a freeze frame, my hand wrapping the white gauze around the massive hairy ankle of the juvenile. The room was silent except for the hum of the computer fan. "Close the door," he said. "Lock it." 2 hours later, the room wasn't filled with local cops. It was filled with men in suits who didn't introduce themselves and didn't show badges. They weren't FBI. They were something else. They confiscated the hard drive. They confiscated the backup server. They confiscated my personal notebook. They didn't ask me if Bigfoot was real. They asked me who else had seen the footage. They asked if I had made copies. They were a containment team, moving with a terrifying efficiency that suggested they had done this before. This wasn't a discovery to them. It was a leak they had to plug. Then came the leverage. One of the suits sat across from me, sliding a manila folder across the desk. Inside were stills from the video. Me cutting the lock, me stomping the mud, me letting the creature go. "This is a compilation of 18 separate felonies, Officer Rivera," he said calmly. "Obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, aiding and abetting. You're looking at 20 years in federal prison." He let the silence hang there, heavy and suffocating. "Or," he continued, sliding a pre-written incident report over the photos, "you had a camera malfunction after the initial shots fired and you arrested 3 poachers who were chasing a bear. It wasn't a choice, it was an ultimatum. They didn't care about justice. They cared about the narrative. They were protecting the status quo. If the footage got out, the logging industry shuts down. The tourism industry panics. The scientific community collapses. They were keeping the world simple by burying the complex truth. I looked at the photos of my crimes, then at the pre-written lie. I signed the paper. I sold my integrity to stay out of a cell, and in doing so, I became a permanent brick in the wall of silence. The poachers were transferred to federal custody the next morning and vanished into the system. I checked the logs a week later. Their booking records were sealed. The bear poaching case never went to trial. They were likely cut loose or reassigned, paid off to keep their mouths shut about the asset they lost. The entire event was scrubbed from the blotter. It was as if that Tuesday in November never happened. The only proof that it was real was the memory of that intelligent amber eye looking at me through the cage bars. I realized then that the conspiracy wasn't active malice. It was bureaucratic inertia. The system is designed to reject anomalies. I wasn't the first ranger to see something, and I wouldn't be the last. The malfunctioned body cams, the corrupted dash cam footage, the lost reports, it was a pattern. The department knew. The state knew. They managed the Sasquatch like they managed wildfires. You contain the perimeter, you suppress the flare-ups, and you never ever let the public see the flames. The footage exists. I know it does. They didn't destroy it. Governments never destroy potential leverage. It's on a server in a sub-basement in Sacramento or DC, tagged with a clearance code that doesn't exist on public records. It's sitting there, a digital ghost, waiting for a hacker or a whistleblower to set it free. It contains the undeniable proof of a new species and the undeniable proof of a good cop breaking the law to save it. It is the most dangerous movie in the world. I retired 2 years later. I couldn't wear the badge anymore knowing what it protected. I live in a cabin now, far from the redwoods, but I still keep a police scanner on my desk. Every now and then, late at night, I hear a call come in from a rookie in Sector 4. "Dispatch, I have a 10-something suspicious subject, large bipedal." And then the radio goes silent, cut off by a supervisor telling them to switch to a secure channel. I take a sip of whiskey and smile. The truth is still out there, walking the ridges, and no amount of classified tape can cage it forever.